See, this is what Joe Rogan does. He just starts recording right as people are making small talk, and then 5 minutes in, they're like, "Oh, we're recording."
Yikes. It's great.
Anyways,
Yeah.
Nice.
welcome everyone to Kipper Bros podcast. Today we're gonna talk about money. You all ready to talk about money?
Sure thing. Is that
So
what
are
we're
you
gonna
sticking
talk
to your
about?
title?
I don't know what we're gonna title it. Let's see how this goes.
I
I have to
liked
get
the Was
something
Jesus
clickbaity.
pro-business title. That was cool.
Was Jesus pro business? Yeah, I mean that's clickbaity enough. That works. My issue with the title is Jesus never said one thing about business, did he?
He mentioned like the parable of the talents, was it? You know, that guy. I mean, those talents, some people say they're like abilities, your talents. But it was actually money in the story, that he was giving. And it can be applied a lot of different ways, but it's very obviously an example of business. Like, take your money, invest it somehow, trade, do business, and then, those who did it well were rewarded. I don't know if there's any other examples, but that's one I thought of.
So in that story, they had capital, and they went and used their capital to get more cash. That is
Right.
at the most basic level what that story is about.
What about the Minas? Was that kind of a parallel story? Similar stuff?
Yeah, that's the same story, right? Maybe slightly altered. I mean, he probably kind of had these stories that he went around telling and switched it up every now and then for different audiences, and so different gospel writers kind of have slightly different accounts of it. But yeah, same concept where they had some kind of resource and used that resource to get more resources, which, yeah, I guess that is business, huh?
And then there's the thing where he kind of drove out the business people from the temple. So that was probably
Right.
an example of where they were doing business in the wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there it was more about just the wrong place and wrong time too. Like, if, at least from what I've heard, I haven't researched this a ton, but I think what was happening there is they were selling animals for sacrifice, and they were the same people who could determine if the sacrifices that people brought were legitimate or not. So what they could do is be like, nope, that turtle dove doesn't work. Here's a tiny little blemish, but guess what? I've got one right here you can buy, slightly marked up. And so
Yeah.
I think it was a pretty exploitive business venture. So I think that kind of compounded the terribleness of it. It was literally in the temple. They were doing business in the temple, already not great, but I think they were also exploiting people with that business in God's name.
Yeah, I mean, he called them a den of thieves. Like, you've made the house of prayer a den of thieves. So I'm pretty sure he wouldn't describe every business as a den of thieves. But there was definitely something about that one going on where it was unjust. And I think too, it was in the court where the Gentiles came to worship and kind of taking up that space. And so he said, "My house will be a house of prayer for all nations." But they were actually taking up the space that was intended for people from outside the Jewish nation to come and worship. So a couple things wrong, I think, with that situation.
So the reason I wanted to talk about this kind of from a higher level is, what kind of sparked it partially is I was just in Delhi teaching a class on faith and finance, and second time I've taught this class, so I kind of pulled up my old notes, and the way I start every one of these classes off is with a true or false question, and I have 2 sentences, and they need to check a box, true or false. First sentence is, "Blessed are the poor," and the second sentence is, "Woe to the rich." And I generally, about 50% of them select false on "Blessed are the poor," and 80 to 90% select false on "Woe to the rich." And the fun thing then is to pull out my Bible. And in Luke's account of the Beatitudes, Jesus did not say, blessed are the poor in spirit. He said, blessed are the poor, full stop. And it kind of goes along with the rest of Luke's gospel, which has a lot to say about the love of money. And it's a very kind of social gospel, talking a lot about poor people and the oppressed, And so, so it's Jesus's exact words, blessed are the poor and woe to the rich. And 80% of Christians would just disagree with that and don't even know that he said that. And so I usually start off the class that way, and then I talk a lot about the ethic of the New Testament about money, which I do think Jesus had more warnings about greed and about the love of money and about materialism. I think that was the bulk of his teachings. And then we have a few parables, like the parable of the talents. I can think of that parable, and that's it. Maybe you guys can help me with some other of Jesus, specifically Jesus's teachings about money that would kind of encourage accumulating stuff, investing your money, trying to make money. I just don't see a lot of that there. I see a lot of warnings about wealth. And we talked about this on the first episode as well, but there is that kind of cognitive dissonance I have having a podcast like this. Like the last podcast we had Shane on and talked about how he scaled multiple businesses. He had great business tips, and it's a business podcast partially. And so we talk so much about this, and we say it's from a biblical lens. But then if we go to the source of our ethic, like the primary source is Jesus. It's not the Old Testament. It's not even Paul, although his words are authoritative. But it's Jesus, like we're red letter Christians, right? That's the most important thing. And he was so negative about money, that there is some cognitive dissonance there for me, and so I wanted to kind of explore that today. Why is it that Jesus had such strong warnings about materialism, and as business owners, how can we do business in a way that is still faithful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Jesus was really down hard against injustice, and I think some of the passages, like the one in James, I guess that wasn't Jesus, but I think James is, getting his material from Jesus, where he's like, weep and howl, weep and mourn, because of your riches. And I in that case, it was specifically like, because you've been taking advantage of people, and in the last day, their testimony is going to come against you. Like, so what good is your wealth going to do you at that point? And I think that's one of the reasons why Jesus was so down hard on it, is because of the injustice. But then the other one, which, like in the example of the rich young ruler who came, is like, I'll follow you, Jesus. And he's like, well, sell everything that you have and then come and give it to the poor, and then come follow me. And he wasn't willing to do that. It kind of gets in the way of following Jesus. I think because when we have a lot of money, we can easily put our trust in that money, and we don't really see our need of Jesus. We don't really see our need of him when we feel like we're self-reliant because we have plenty of money, and which comes with power and the ability to get other people to do stuff for you and stay safe and all that.
What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, those are good points. So yeah, when I see the life of Jesus, like I see somebody who came and lived a kind of nomadic lifestyle, and kind of very relational, like kind of hanging out in people's houses and stuff. So he certainly is an example of kind of a prophetic teacher who walked the face of the earth, had a lot of warnings against greed and materialism, which I think are really well placed and important for all of us, including for the business people of the day there. But but yeah, I think that he certainly didn't reject the material world. Like, he was dining in people's homes, he was eating food with people. Business people had to go out and do business in order to make enough money to get that food on the table. The wine that he drank with people, and so forth. So you see that he didn't reject the material world like a monk living in a tree, and just so there's that asceticism that sometimes we can almost draw from the example. Like, looking at the example of Christ, it could almost lead us into, okay, well, this actually points towards an ascetic lifestyle. And I think that there's that tension that we all need to live with as believers, of what does it mean to reject materialism, to embrace Christ and his teachings, to be generous with the poor, to engage with the material world in a way that doesn't draw our hearts away from him. Those are all tensions that we kind of wrestle with, and sometimes we have more questions than answers. I think that's okay. I don't think that we're going to have it completely like figured out. But yeah, so when I look at his life, yeah, he doesn't talk about business strategy and scaling businesses and how to start a business, that type of thing. But there is a lot of his, yeah, I would say the parable of the stewards and the minas probably comes closest to his direct teaching on being faithful as stewards of God's creation, and some of that, part of that, I believe, would be business. So I think that certainly applies. And then as far as like his warnings on wealth and his teachings to give to the poor, I think those are just super relevant for business people, because business people have an incredible opportunity to do good with their profits. And so I think that, the way I see it, and we talked some about this on the first podcast, like you said, but the way I see it is that we are we're responsible to steward creation and then help other people with that. So that could be our families too, like, and ourselves, like to say that I have no personal needs and I'm not gonna take care of myself, I think is also yeah, that kind of asceticism I don't think is healthy. Now, of course, like, to say I have to live in luxury and fly first class and all that is yeah, what would be examples of? I mean, that's always the tricky thing too, because what's luxurious to one person isn't to another. What's poverty to one person is not poverty to another. Like, it's all pretty relative, and so it's really tricky stuff. But I think it comes down to maybe the heart of it. Can we read Christ's teachings and take them in and live it out in a way that we're living generously and that we're trusting him? I guess is how what comes to my mind.
Weren't you kind of into Stoicism, Joe? How does that relate to being poor part of that discipline?
Well, I never really thought of Stoicism as much in relation to poverty, as more just the pain that comes with the difficulties in life, and being willing to embrace that and say, hey, this is part of the discipline, is just going ahead and being able to like keep going through painful scenarios, difficult scenarios, challenging, heavy, weighty scenarios, and thinking of Stoicism from the sense that we grow under resistance, like even physically. Like, in order to gain muscle, you have to have some kind of resistance. And so spiritually, well, I don't know about, spiritually, yes. I mean, through life's challenges, we grow mentally. Mental toughness comes through really challenging situations, I think. So.
Right. And poverty probably could be one of those challenging situations. Which, by the way, I think you can be a business owner and be poor too, right? Being a business owner doesn't necessarily mean making a lot of money. But I wanted to circle back, Titus. I thought of something when what you led out saying, blessed are the poor. And that might be kind of confusing. It would be interesting to tease that out a little bit. Am I thinking right that in that passage in Luke, there's another example, like blessed are those who weep now, and it's because there's going to be a reversal later, like because you're going to laugh or you're going to be happy later. Does the same thing apply to blessed are the poor, because there's going to be a reversal someday, and you're going to be rich? Or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things going on. I think the biggest thing going on with the Beatitudes is that Jesus is saying that the reversal is starting now, not necessarily that it's just coming in the future. Like the kingdom is coming, and it's coming for these kinds of people. It's coming for those who are the down and out. Not that it's not coming for everyone else, but there's a very special place in God's heart for those that society has overlooked, those who are suffering. And it's those people that primarily, on some level, that Jesus came for. And then, I mean, I guess you could turn this into prosperity gospel and say, well, if the kingdom of God is now, then blessed are the poor, for they're going to be rich. I don't think that's what Jesus was talking about, but those who are, that the world generally looks at and says, oh, they're not blessed, are the ones who the blessing of the kingdom is specifically for. And those who the world looks at and like, oh, they're so blessed, they have so much, those are the ones who often fail to experience the kingdom. I think that's what Jesus is saying. But still, it really should shock us on some level, because the way we use the term blessed is you have a lot. Things are going well for you. You have great health. You have perfect family. You're making money. You're blessed. And maybe there's some level of truth there, but if you look, when Jesus specifically used the word blessed, there's a couple instances of it. But the primary instance of him using that actual term, blessed or fortunate, is a complete reversal of how we generally use that term. And I think that means something for us. I'm not totally sure what it means, but it should shock us on some level.
You mentioned the prosperity gospel, and I was in Kenya from 2015 to 2020, and the prosperity gospel was very common there. But it is interesting to me, like, how there's kind of a ditch on either side of that, because, the prosperity gospel, the way I see it, has taken a truth and twisted it into a complete lie. That's the way I see the prosperity gospel. But on the other hand, if we react so hard to that lie, we can actually kind of overlook some truths that are truly principles of Scripture. And that principle that those who are generous will be materially blessed, it's kind of in Scripture. It is there. Like even in Luke, like Jesus said it, that those who give to the poor and give their their houses and lands will receive, multiple back in this life and the next. And then he adds with persecutions. So it's not like it's just easy and fun and everything goes well, right? Is what he was saying, I think. But then too, in the New Testament, in I think it's Corinthians, Paul talks about it too. And I can't remember the exact verse and exactly what it says, but the principle's there in the New Testament, and Paul talks about it. And then, of course, there's the Old Testament scriptures that are very common, that are used pretty heavily by prosperity gospel preachers. So I think I've kind of swung back a little bit to at least being able to acknowledge that the principle is real, that those who are generous and give in this life. I think there's, of course, the spiritual blessing is the biggest thing, but there is also a material blessing that can come in this life from being generous to those around us here and now.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus said, "Give and it will be given to you." I'm hesitant to agree that in the New Testament that you will get physical blessings, financial blessings for being generous. You mentioned, okay, so where it says that in Luke, it says it'll be given back to you. That could be financial or it could be other. The other one was, yeah, you'll receive all this stuff in this life and in the life to come. You'll receive all this stuff back. I guess there it is. You can't really argue with that one.
Titus, I was wondering if we're going to like have an all-out debate. Like, is this going to be our first like complete debate disagreement here on this podcast?
I mean, so I would like to talk about specific verses rather than some general principle, because you can say general principle anything, and unless you have verses. So yeah, the passage where Jesus said, you will receive all of that back in this life. And I think he mentions material things. He mentions relationships as well there. That's an interesting one. So is that a motivation to give then, because you want physical reward in this life? That's where it gets really hairy, is if maybe that's true. Maybe on some level, like I think about this in my life, like I think if God really wants to accomplish the sorts of things that we're trying to do in India, community development projects, then why wouldn't he make our company profitable? I think there could be some element of that that's true and real, but is that our motivation? Is that why we give? Is so that we can get more? Even if it's not the primary motivation, I get a little queasy about that being a motivation.
One example of this, I guess, is us, or maybe it was myself. At our company retreat recently, we were up in the mountains. We have a mixture of people. They're different religions, but we're very outspoken that we believe that the reason we're blessed, and everybody knows it's that our business is going well, profit. That's what we all think of. The reason we're blessed is because we're honoring God by doing our work with integrity, doing it with all our heart, and because we're also generous. I said that, and which is kind of like this, a little bit of that prosperity gospel idea. I mean, not the wrong end, but hopefully, Joe, and you're in the center of your balance there. I don't know. But yeah, it is a question. I don't know if it's, in the Old Testament, there's a lot of teachings, and there's Psalms and Proverbs, probably specifically, but even more, where it's like, your reward is material benefits, wealth, if you fear the Lord, if you honor Him, and I think that tune has definitely changed somewhat in the New Testament, but those things I would see more as like principles of the universe that God set in motion, than like, if we're generous with others, they're going to be generous back.
It's not like God is tinkering with the laws of the universe to make you do better because you're being generous. Maybe it's just, if you honor God, you will be living a life of flourishing, which means you'll be successful, which means in some situations, not in all situations, because some people are under oppressive governments or whatever, but in a situation where you have opportunity, there will be profit.
I wonder about that, and I would hesitate to say it's completely one or the other, like to say that it's completely the laws of the universe that God created and that there's no like intervention in it. I would hesitate to go that far to say there's none, but I do think of it that I was listening to like a reel. It's been a while ago, and the person was not a Christian, But the person was saying how generous people, wealth flows back to them. And that was not coming from a Christian. And so I think that that person had found the laws of the universe that God had created to be real. And like they had figured it out without knowing that or acknowledging God in the process, unfortunately. But I think of it that I think there's a lot of truth to that, that it's a law. It's a law that God has created about sowing and reaping and generosity.
So what about people who are listening to this maybe who are generous and are honoring God, and every month they struggle to make ends meet, you know? Because I can hear people listening to this who might be in that position. That used to be me. I used to have no money and always was running out. And I believe I was honoring God back then. I didn't have this sort of opportunity to run a company. I didn't think I could. And you could say, well, those mindsets are not of God. You know, I should be confident and think I can do anything. I'm like, no, there's super confident people who are not believers and are not honoring God. And they're just, maybe that it's a good mindset to be confident and to feel like you can go do stuff and figure stuff out. But there are people who do not honor God who have that, maybe they've had that modeled for them. Maybe they are more naturally predisposed to be like that, and then they succeed. And then there's people who are following Jesus better than I am, who, and like I said, this was me 8 years ago. I had no opportunity, or like there was no framework that I had of, oh, I can go start a company and be successful, you know. Some people have tried and have failed at their company, and it's not because they have sin in their life, you know. That's where the complexity comes in. And I think that's where, like, so there's these 3 wisdom books. There's Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. Proverbs is coming along, and it's like this straight-laced thing where if you do this, this will happen. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Well, therefore, if your kid is doing something wrong, it's because you didn't train them right. Like that's that kind of black and white thinking that runs through Proverbs. And it's really helpful because there are these principles in the universe. But then the Bible Project has taught me this, listening to Tim Mackey talk about these 3 wisdom books. Then Ecclesiastes comes along, and or maybe it's Job next, I'm not sure. Job and Ecclesiastes are kind of in conversation with Proverbs, according to Tim Mackey. And like Job, for example, did nothing wrong. And it was his friends who were the Proverbs guys saying, oh, definitely you did something wrong. That's why you lost everything. And at the end of the day, like at the end of the book of Job, God is like, I'm God, and, you know, trust my wisdom. And it's basically a book that says sometimes things are going to go really bad for great people, and we don't know why. And then Ecclesiastes is even more cynical if you read that, you know. And so I think you have to kind of hold these things in tension where, yes, there are principles of the universe that are helpful, but don't weaponize them and assume it's always going to be this way.
Right.
Because that's also not helpful.
Yeah.
That's well put.
Yeah.
I would completely agree with that, because there's the laws of the universe that do exist that God created. So the law of sowing and reaping is a real thing. But sometimes it's going to rain on your parade. Sometimes there's going to be crop failure. And no matter what that is in your life, like sometimes that's going to happen. But I think that for those who don't grow weary and give up, I think that if you just get back up, keep learning, keep trying, you're going to win at the end of the day. I think so.
Like you, Titus, right?
Or you could be like Job and not win, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, I was able to succeed because I lived in a country that had amazing opportunities. Like the United States has more economic opportunities than pretty much every country on earth today, and certainly throughout human history. And I was able to succeed because someone in my network offered me kind of a kickstart to start my first company. And then I also had people in my network who were business owners in the same industry who could coach me. Yeah, part of it was my ambition and working hard, but there could be people who have the same level of intellect and persistence that I have, but just don't have those opportunities. Like, I think there's a quote once that if success was a direct result of hard work and innovation, every woman in Africa would be a millionaire. You know, if you think about the women in Africa, how much they work, you know, but they just don't have the opportunity, or don't have, the economy's not strong enough for them to get super rich.
Mm-hmm. But what's our definition of success there? Because it shouldn't be becoming a millionaire. It shouldn't be a dollar amount. I think that success could look different for somebody who didn't have the opportunities you had, but that they could have done something with the little opportunities that they did have. And to me, that's success. Like,
if they have some open hands savings,
making progress. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like at Open Hands, we teach that take a look at the little bit that God has put in your hand, and what can you do with that? So,
right.
Yeah.
I think Paul's an example of being in different situations, poor and wealthy at different times. And what did he say? He said, you know, whether I had a whole lot or whether I had a whole little, I learned to be content. And that contentment, I think, is a big blessing. Like, sometimes, you know, things go really well, and it could have been, Titus, like, just the right opportunities lined up. And I'm not going to say it's, well, this happened because God has blessed me because I did something right. No, it's all grace. It's all a gift of God, no matter what it is. It's not that, well, I've done something, and so therefore God has to bless me. It's just, I have an abundance right now. I'm thankful to God because He's the giver of all good gifts. But then Paul also said he was content when he had a little bit. You know, I just have a little this point in time, and I can still be thankful for that I have a roof over my head and shoes on my feet, if that. Just being content and recognizing whatever good I do have is from God. And you can be thankful in all kinds of different situations and still give God glory. But yeah, I do agree. I definitely agree with you, Titus, that this could be, you know, the prosperity gospel can be weaponized in different ways. Like, because you're poor, you're doing something wrong and you're not blessed by God. Like, you're not a good Christian, or you're not honoring God somehow. That's terrible. And also what India is trying to counteract with the anti-conversion laws, I think is wrong too, where you're telling people if you come and follow Jesus, you'll get these material benefits. And I think that's wrong too. Like, that kind of teaching or motivation is abusive and wrong and should be outlawed. So yeah.
You heard it here. Tim is in favor of those laws, everybody.
Yeah. I don't like how if they're abused, no law should be abused, but like, if you take the law at face value, yeah, it's a good one.
Moving right along. More to the point of is Jesus pro-business? So we've been talking about wealth in general, Christians' mentality to that. Business is something different, slightly different. Like, if you think about the parable that Jesus gave, you know, it doesn't say that they went and hired people and got them to do the heavy lifting and led the organization, whatever. A business is I think a lot of people might agree with what we're saying, but they still have kind of an issue with just the inherent way businesses are set up, you know, where the owners or the shareholders get rewarded simply, in some cases, simply because they have capital, you know. Maybe they're not even contributing that much. They just had access to resources. Maybe it was generational. They invested in it. People are running the company and making them money. I mean, that's how it might be for some big companies. I mean, for our little startups, it's a little different. But I actually we can talk about it a little bit now. I'd love to have Chris Whitmer on the podcast to talk specifically about capitalism, because he has some really, and he's not like some socialist or whatever, but he has some really thoughtful critiques of some of these things. And so maybe we can do that down the road, but just briefly, like, was Jesus pro-business? Coming down to that specific question, can we answer that question? Because a business is different, I think, even than using what you have, and you can be a solopreneur, for example, and that's following that. Maybe that is business, but that's following the parable.
So is your question, was Jesus big business? Because that's almost what I'm hearing, Titus.
Right. There is, I guess, a difference between, there can be a difference between big and small businesses, big corporations like Walmart, or Jeff Bezos. I mean, that gets more complicated as you scale it. But I mean, you guys came up with the title, "Is Jesus pro-business?" It's a tough one to, like, I couldn't answer that with affirmation. I wouldn't say, yes, Jesus is pro-business. I mean, maybe I would say Jesus is kind of agnostic about business. It's not, business exists, in a capitalist society. And I don't think Jesus is like super stoked about it, or necessarily that against it. It's like, yeah.
Isn't it part of just how humans are doing that creation mandate of caring for creation, and like even early on, there's trading. Like, is trading business? Is working your field and then trading some of the crops for a plow that someone built.
Yeah.
That's
Maybe
business, right? And we work together, and we've created our society where we can have all these different products to be more productive because of specialization, because of business. And I think in that sense, I wouldn't, is he pro-business? Well, in the sense that that's how societies have formed, and he wants society to work. Wants humans to be able to coexist and be productive and inherit the earth, I guess. But then the question of like interest and interest is an interesting one, I guess. Interesting one.
No pun intended.
Because in the Old Testament, there are laws that prohibit taking interest. I don't know if it was from certain people or if it prohibits it across the board. But that would be maybe an example of like just a passive investor or someone who has capital, and they can make returns on that because they have the capital. I don't know.
I have another guy to have on the podcast who's extremely against usury. We could get some real hot podcasts here.
Define usury for
usury
us.
is interest, right? It's an old English term for interest.
Maybe sometime we need to have a podcast on what is business.
Right. I mean, that's part of what I'm asking here, because there's specialization, and I think specialization is beautiful. Get really good at something and then trade with people. That's kind of, I guess, at the most basic level what business is. You just get really good at something and spend your time doing that because you like doing it and you're good at it, and then someone else is really good at something else, and that trade is mutually beneficial. There's that. And even solopreneurs, you could say, are basically just doing that. What a company with employees is it's an organization of people, of specialists. And that organization is owned by somebody. The equity, whether it's the brand or the customers or equipment, used in the company, the assets of the company belong to the owners. And the owners can hire and fire people. And if you're in this contract with the employer, you basically have to do what they say, or they can end that contract. It's not slavery. Slavery is a different thing. That system, I think, people get really frustrated with, especially when the employers treat their employees poorly. And maybe that's all. Maybe that's the only bone people have to pick with it. Really, is that they don't have any options of good employers. But is Jesus pro these organizations we create, and the way it works in a capitalist society where the owner has the equity grows his equity, as he grows the organization.
He's pro stewardship, so basically what an owner has is something that he needs to steward. If it's $100,000 or $1 million, he's got to steward that somehow. So what's the best way to steward it? And maybe therein lies the question: is it helping the poor by giving money to them and creating dependencies, Joe, or starting savings groups? Community development work? Is it investing in business to create more wealth? It's probably not like living a lavish lifestyle and using other people to support that. I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess I'm pro big business. Like I see examples like Hobby Lobby. Like I think they've done it well. And so I think that you can scale a business and take care of your employees. I think you can scale a business, use Christ's principles to take care of your employees and love them and make sure that they have their needs taken care of. I think it's an opportunity for ministry. So I think business can be a ministry. We can have business as mission. That can be a big business. So yeah, I can see where there can be hesitations with that concept. Like, is it okay to scale a business big? I think the answer is yes. I think there's some things you have to be really careful in. I think that some of the Jesus warnings become really relevant to you when you do that. But that would be my opinion on it. That it comes down to stewardship and ministry in your business as mission. And like you said, Tim, like to do that in order to live like a really lavish lifestyle and luxury, like I'm pretty sure that's not biblical. but in order to do that, to be able to serve your employees better, to serve more in being able to give more to ministries, and in some cases, some people are just trying to build their business so that they can take care of their family, and so that's probably at a much smaller scale. Yeah, and some businesses are just out there working as hard as they can to break even. Like if that's you today and you're listening to this podcast, God bless you. Hang in there.
I'll
Hire us as fractional CFOs. Yeah. Well, this is good. I think it's a complicated topic. It's definitely something I wanted to talk about because we're having a lot of conversations with business owners, business coaches, leaders, and they're giving a lot of great tips. But we have to, as followers of Jesus, like our primary source of truth is Christ, and so I don't think we're all exactly at the same place, but close enough that we didn't get in a huge debate. Debates can happen even if you're pretty close to the same place. It just depends on how feisty you're feeling. Which I would actually like I was saying, to have some people on the podcast who have different opinions than us and have them really push back, because I think that's valuable, and I think it would also be valuable for them to hear from us and to be like, okay, well, maybe not all business owners are so far off on a tangent. Maybe we do have some things in common.
Here are
so maybe
just great examples of business people.
It can't be done right. Yeah. Just look at us.
So Titus, I think you have a responsibility to bring them on the podcast so we can speak some truth into their lives. No, I'm just kidding.
Amen. Oh, that's great. Yeah, well, it was good talking to you guys again. I know the last two podcasts were interviews and not everyone could make it, so it's good to have everyone back on here. And I know we don't have many listeners yet, but for those of you tuning in, we're happy that you're joining us, and we'd love to hear from you. Okay, thanks, Tim and Joe. Good connecting again.
Yep.
See you next episode.
See you guys.
See ya.